I don't want to overstate it, but it's possible the prosecution's case is falling apart. It did not go particularly well for them. Let's start with the DNA. What happened?
Well, the way these authorities got to Kohberger wasn't through any other evidence at the beginning, but just a little speck of DNA, smaller than a piece of dust, that was left on the button of a knife sheath that was left behind. They used this speck of DNA, they processed it so that they could give it to an FBI laboratory. The FBI laboratory then, after months of not admitting what they had done, it was revealed in the end of January in court that they had taken this DNA and they had uploaded it to two websites, ancestry DNA websites, that prohibit law enforcement from using this DNA. The FBI did this not out of any evil reasons, but just out of their zeal. You have to go back to the time of the killing. Here was a murder of 4 young children on the loose. They had really no clues except for this DNA. Except for this DNA, it was in many ways the perfect crime. They had no blood evidence, really. They had no evidence of anyone stalking these young college students. All they had was this DNA, so they ran with it. And this DNA allowed them to open up many other doors, ultimately having a series of search warrants that led to the suspect's, Bryan Kohberger's, phone, his car, his apartment. But without that DNA, they couldn't have gotten these search warrants. And now the defense is saying, wait a minute. This suspect's Fourth Amendment rights were violated by the FBI's going into these prohibited websites.
You've been saying this all along. You've been suspecting that the FBI got this match between the DNA, the touch DNA on the knife sheath, and matched it to Kohberger's father, possibly by doing something they're not allowed to do, which is use the commercial DNA websites that people like you and I might go to if we're looking for a long-lost relative. They have a public database. C.C. Moore, the original creator of genetic genealogy, talked to us about this a long time ago, saying there's only one that's totally public, and anyone can upload their DNA and see what's on there. The other two are fee-for-service private companies that are not allowed to be used by law enforcement. Otherwise, nobody would go on there, right? They'd be like, if I ever committed a crime or have a relative down the line who might have committed a crime, I'm going to get him in trouble. So there's supposed to be this hard wall. And you said early on you suspected, because the FBI seemed to be very cagey about this whole thing, they didn't want to turn over the results of how they got this to anybody, that maybe they had done something they weren't allowed to. Go ahead.
Not only did they not want to turn over the results, they said literally that they had ripped up the evidence of their research. They said, we just threw it out. Who ever heard of it in a major murder investigation, the FBI discarding evidence? But this is what they did. But the defense kept on pressing and pressing, and now they got a judge to give him the evidence, and it proves beyond a shadow of a doubt, it came out in open court, that the FBI violated the protocols of these two genetic websites. Now, how is that going to affect the case? The judge
before you answer that, let's just show the audience what Kohberger's defense attorney, Ann Taylor, yes, that's her name, argued about this investigative genetic genealogy, IGG, evidence. Listen to her in SOT 41.
Your Honor, our position is that the court should suppress the IGG identification and everything that flows from that. This is supported by Fourth Amendment of the United States Constitution, due process, Article 1, Section 17 of the Idaho Constitution. Your Honor, there was no warrant for several phases of the search that led to the IGG work, investigative genetic genealogy. And we think every single one of those stages, a warrant was required. None was given, and so this must be suppressed.
She's saying all the goods they got after getting that hit have to be suppressed and cannot be used because they're, in essence, the fruit of the poisonous tree.
Exactly. And if you look at what they had before then, There's not much except for one thing. After Kohberger is arrested, he's in a Pennsylvania jail, and they do a cheek swab. And the DNA from that cheek swab matches the DNA on the button of the knife sheath. That is pretty substantial evidence. But if they can get that thrown out, that will make a case that seems pretty much a shut case to be more open than shut. And there's going to be it's a possibility of a Franks hearing. It's a judicial process named after a 1978 Supreme Court case where evidence was thrown out because the police had falsified information to get their warrants. The judge has not said he will have this Franks hearing, but he has raised the possibility, and he's asked the lawyers to keep time available to have such a hearing. And if that's
not what the prosecution wanted to hear. The prosecution wanted to hear, there's no need for a hearing. This is ridiculous. You know, irrespective of how we got to Bryan Kohberger's father as being related to the person whose DNA was on the knife sheath, we know it is Bryan Kohberger's DNA because we ultimately took a cheek swab that shows it was him. But the problem for the prosecution is the judge is not saying no. He's keeping the door open. He might actually have a hearing on this, so he's at least a little interested. But can I just say this to what you just said, Howard? The DNA matching Kohberger directly is absolutely devastating. There's no question. It's a terrible fact for the defense. But as I understand her argument, Ann Taylor's, it's that you would never have been cheek swabbing Bryan Kohberger if you hadn't been doing the shenanigans with the DNA and 23andMe. Like, she's saying you can't even use the cheek swab because it too is fruit of the poisonous tree.
That is what she's arguing. That's part of her argument. But also at that hearing, something else was revealed, which is perhaps even more dramatic and makes her case even more substantial.
Okay, so hold on. But before we get to that, let me finish up this part. I know there's a lot of stuff to discuss. So just so the audience knows, that's what she's trying to argue. She's trying to say everything that followed as a result of you figuring out that Bryan Kohberger's DNA, his dad's DNA, was traceable from that knife sheath has to be removed. You have to get rid of it, including the cheek swab. Now, the judge did not seem like he was going to do that. He seemed very into the actual cheek swab, and he didn't sound like a man who thinks that's fruit of any poisonous tree. But here he is, Judge Hitler, talking about that DNA match in SOT 43.
There's a DNA match between the DNA in the sheath and Mr. Kohberger. Isn't that probable cause every day and twice on Sunday?
Not in this context. Not in this context because of the IgG work.
That's, again, she's saying the investigative genetic genealogy undermines it and makes it unusable. We continue to face uncertainty when it comes to the economy with a perfect storm brewing as Social Security and Medicare hit a breaking point as the largest generation is hitting retirement. A smaller workforce means a smaller tax base. You pair that with our growing national debt and our rising cost of living, and we could have a very big problem on our hands. So what are you doing now to protect your family for the future? Are you diversifying? Gold can be very useful to you in this. It can be a safe haven in hard economic times. And Birch Gold has a super great reputation, and they will make it very easy to diversify a portion of your savings, if you so choose, into physical gold. Birch Gold will help you transition an existing IRA or 401k in whole or in part into an IRA in gold, and it will not cost you 1 cent out of pocket. Protect your future today. Text MK to 989898 and get your free info kit on gold and a copy of the ultimate guide for gold in the Trump era with a foreword by Donald Trump Jr. There's no obligation, just information. Birch Gold has earned the trust of countless Americans looking to safeguard their savings. You just text my initials, MK, to the number 989898 today. Thanks so much for watching. If you like what you just saw, hit the subscribe button for more clips and full episodes.